I was 17 when the Russians came. We lived in a quiet village near Sasis, nestled in the Gauja Valley. My name is Edvans Kalninch, son of a school teacher and a seamstress. Ours was a simple home, but it had pride in it. My father's bookshelves groaned under volumes of Latvian poetry, history, and philosophy. Our flag, red, white, red, hung behind his desk. He taught me that freedom wasn't something handed to you. It was something you had to keep holding, even when your hands went numb. That spring, I helped him build a fence around the garden. We didn't talk much, just hammered the posts, strung the wire. He told me the birds sang differently that year, like they sensed what was coming. On June 17, 1940, Soviet tanks rolled across the Daugava. No declaration of war, no fight, just a silent occupation. The red stars painted on their turrets gleamed under the summer sun like blood spots. Soviet officers posted proclamations at city squares declaring we had asked to join the glorious workers' union. I remember the stunned silence of neighbors gathered outside the post office, reading the notices, the disbelief, the fear. We were told not to resist. We were told it was temporary. Then came the arrests. My father's best friend, Mr. Sprogus, a lawyer and ardent nationalist, vanished one night. So did the priest. So did two of my school teachers. Just gone. By August, men in long leather coats began showing up at night in black GAZ cars. We called them the ghosts. If they stopped at your house, you weren't seen again. One evening, I returned from chopping wood to find my father burning his books. Not all of them, just the ones with too much Latvia in them. His hands shook as he fed the pages to the fire. I tried to speak, but he stopped me with a look I'll never forget. "There's no reason to get arrested for poetry," he said. I still think about that. In June 1941, just before the Germans invaded, the Soviets began their great purge. We didn't know what it was called then, only what it meant. Entire families taken in the night and packed into cattle cars headed east. Over 15,000 Latvians, doctors, farmers, teachers deported to Siberia. Among them was my uncle Andres and his wife. Their daughter was left behind. She was 5. When the Germans launched Operation Barbarossa later that month, I cheered. We all did. The swastika looked like salvation next to the hammer and sickle. People hung flowers on German trucks when they rolled into Riga. A new regime, yes, but we thought it might let us breathe again. We were wrong. The Germans didn't bring freedom. They brought order, efficient, cold, and ruthless. They used our hatred of the Soviets to turn us into tools. But I didn't know that yet. At first, I worked on a farm that had belonged to a deported family. I didn't ask questions. Nobody did. I was young, and part of me was grateful just to eat. But soon I noticed the ghetto walls rising in Riga. I heard the rumors about Rumbula. I saw a neighbor, Jacobs, a Jewish baker, get hauled away. His wife wailed in the street until a soldier struck her with the butt of his rifle. After that, she never came out again. Still, the Soviets haunted my mind more than the Nazis. My country had been erased by Moscow. The Germans at least let us wear our old uniforms, march under old banners. When I turned 18, I joined the Latvian Auxiliary Police. Not because I hated Jews or loved Hitler. I wanted revenge. I wanted to make sense of the years I had spent watching people disappear. The Germans said we could build a new Latvia by destroying Bolshevism. They gave us rifles, uniforms, a chain of command. I told myself I was doing what I had to. In 1943, I volunteered to join the newly formed 15th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, 1st Latvian. It was controversial. Many Latvians saw the SS as foreign oppressors, but to me, it was the only military structure left that allowed us to fight for our land, against the Russians, under our own officers. My mother cried when I told her. "You'll come back like your uncle didn't," she said. I laughed. I didn't understand what she meant. The first time I stood in formation with the others, boys from Riga, Daugavpils, and Ventspils, I felt a strange mix of shame and pride. The black uniforms, the lightning runes, the hard German orders, I didn't understand half of what they were saying, but I understood duty. We trained in Poland. The days were long, the nights cold. I shared a bunk with a boy named Rudolphs who used to be a violin student. He snuck us cigarettes and played imaginary melodies with his fingers at night. "War's just theater for the cruel," he'd whisper. By the time we were deployed, the war had changed again. The Germans were losing ground. The Soviets were advancing. We were to be sent to Kurland to hold the line as long as possible. We didn't know it then, but we were heading to the graveyard of the Reich. That was the last summer I saw green trees. They told us we were holding the line for Europe, that if Kurland fell, all of Germany would fall with it. But I wasn't thinking about Germany. I was thinking about Latvia. We arrived in Tukums in late September 1944, part of the 15th Waffen Grenadier Division, still mostly unblooded. The air smelled of pine and burnt wheat. Soviet artillery was already probing the edges of our positions. The front was collapsing everywhere, but Kurland, this little corner of our homeland, was being turned into a fortress. The Germans refused to retreat. We were to stand and die, or stand and be forgotten. At least it was home soil. I hadn't seen my village in 2 years, and it was only a few kilometers north of the front. I thought about slipping away to find my mother, just to see her face. But orders were strict, and I was now under the command of SS Obersturmführer Müller, a Prussian with a monocle and a hatred of anything sentimental. "There is no time for nostalgia," he said in passable Latvian. "The Bolsheviks will kill you either way." The line we held was a patchwork of trenches, minefields, and frozen fields dotted with shattered farmsteads. Our unit was mixed, Germans, Latvians, and some Estonians. The camaraderie was thin, the language barrier thicker. But in the dark, in the cold, we shared cigarettes and stories. That was enough. My friend Rudolphs, the violinist, grew quieter every day. He had stopped miming his concertos. One night under snowfall, he asked me, "Edvins, what are we doing here? Fighting under someone else's flag for land they've already divided?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. The Soviets struck on October 27, 1944, with a wave of Katyusha rockets that lit the sky like Judgment Day. The ground shook. My ears rang for days after. They followed with tanks and infantry, trying to smash through our sector near Dobeli. We fought like demons. I remember firing until my rifle jammed, switching to a wounded man's MG-42 spraying into advancing shadows. Our positions changed hands 3 times that day. When it was over, I was covered in blood, some of it mine, most not. That night we dug the dead out of the trenches, Germans, Latvians, Russians. A Soviet soldier's face was frozen mid-scream, his hand still clutching a photograph of a child. I kept it in my coat for months. I don't know why. In early November, our regiment was rotated out for 2 days of rest in Skrunda. The village was half burned, the Lutheran church reduced to rubble. I stood outside a bakery where I used to buy bread as a child. Now it was a machine gun nest. The locals watched us with tired eyes. Some offered soup, others spat at our boots. That night I met a woman named Alice, a nurse for the Latvian Red Cross. She was from Riga, sharp-tongued and fearless. She had 2 brothers, one shot by the Soviets, the other conscripted by the Germans and killed in Poland. "I have no love left for flags," she told me, "only graves." We sat on a bench behind the field hospital, drinking potato liquor and pretending we weren't 20 years old with half our lives gone already. When I leaned in to kiss her, she stopped me. "If you live through this," she said, "find me. After the war." I told her I would. I meant it. By December, the Soviet offensives intensified. The Red Army encircled Kurland completely, cutting us off from the rest of Europe. We became the Kurland Kessel, the Kurland Pocket, surrounded, supplies dwindling. The Germans still refused to withdraw us. Hitler insisted we fight to the last bullet. We were now ghosts in German uniforms, fighting a war that was already lost. I wrote a letter to my mother in pencil on a torn ration card. I knew it would never reach her, but writing helped. I told her I was alive, that I remembered the garden, that I hadn't forgotten how her hands smelled of flour when she baked rye bread. I folded it and kept it under my shirt. It stayed there for years. By January 1945, the snow was waist-deep and we were issued more propaganda than ammunition. The Soviet tanks came again. We pushed them back, then they came again and again. I killed men I didn't hate. I lost friends I loved. One night, I found Rudolph's weeping by the trench wall. He held his violin's broken neck like a wounded bird. He said, "We have become everything we feared." I think that's the last thing he said before stepping out into open ground during a barrage. We never found his body. One afternoon in late February, a German sergeant whispered something to me I'll never forget. "You Latvians fight harder than our own, but don't be fooled. They'll leave you here when it's over. You're expendable. We all are." That night I stopped wearing the SS insignia. In my mind, I was no longer fighting for Hitler, not even for Germany. I was fighting for the scraps of Latvia I could still remember. By March, we were already burying ghosts. The snow began to thaw in the ditches outside Saldus, revealing what winter had hidden: frozen bodies, collapsed bunkers, shredded field gear. Crows circled low, brave enough now to feast in daylight. We stopped noticing the smell, or maybe we just stopped caring. The Kurland Pocket had become a prison without bars. 6 major Soviet offensives had come and failed to break us, but each left more of us behind. Thousands dead. No retreat, no advance. Just the same battered earth traded back and forth day after day. The Germans said we were holding the line for strategic integrity. They said Hitler still believed a northern front would matter when the time came. We knew better. We knew we were forgotten. In early April, we buried Lieutenant Stenders, a Latvian officer who'd commanded with discipline but treated us like sons. A Soviet sniper caught him just outside Aus, through the throat. It took him 20 minutes to die. He was the first officer I ever saw cry, not from pain, but from regret. We dug his grave under a collapsed barn and marked it with a helmet on a stick. Rudolph's would have carved his name into the wood, but he was already gone by then. No priest, no rites, just a muttered song and cold earth. That was how we buried most now. We kept fighting because it was all we had left, and because the Soviets never stopped. Even in April, even as Berlin fell to rubble, they hit us with artillery like they were still trying to conquer Europe. Perhaps it was revenge. Perhaps it was sport. I remember a day near Zlekas when our trench took a direct hit. I was thrown into a crater with another man, Karlis from Liepaja, barely 19. He was screaming, holding his leg where the bone jutted out. I tried to calm him, tried to tie a belt around the wound, but it was useless. He looked at me and said, "Don't let them take me." I didn't understand at first. Then I saw the pistol he had pulled from his coat. I turned away before the shot came. Later, I took his papers, wrapped them in oilcloth, and buried them under a birch tree. His mother deserved something. One morning, a strange quiet settled across our line. No mortars, no shouting, just birdsong. We called it the grave silence. Then a runner came from command. Berlin had fallen. May 2nd, they said, Hitler was dead. Germany would surrender. But we were still expected to hold the line. Hold the line for what? That night I met with 5 other Latvians, men I'd trained with, fought beside, nearly died with. We sat in the ruin of a stone chapel, its cross shattered and blackened by fire. A half moon lit the floor through the open roof. "It's over," someone whispered. "No," said another. "It's only changing." We knew that if we surrendered, the Soviets would take us, and they didn't treat prisoners like men. Latvian SS troops were not given quarter. We'd seen what they did to collaborators, to anyone with a uniform. There were rumors of mass executions, trials without defense, camps in the Urals. Some planned to flee into Germany. Others spoke of heading north, into the forests. I said nothing, but I knew even then I would not wear this uniform much longer. On May 8, 1945, the order came, unconditional surrender. The Third Reich was dead. They told us to stack our weapons and wait for Soviet collection. Some did, others fled. A few took their own lives before the Soviets arrived. I watched a group of Estonians walk into the woods with hunting packs and old maps. One of them looked back and said, "You'll be one of us soon." He was right. The next week was chaos. Soviet patrols swept villages collecting any man in uniform. Executions were happening. Some prisoners were marched to Riga. Others were simply never seen again. I burned my uniform under a pile of damp leaves behind an abandoned schoolhouse. It smoked black and thick, but no one stopped me. I put on peasant clothes, found a bicycle, rode until the road ended. At a farmhouse west of Kuldiga, I found a widow who let me stay one night. She said her husband had vanished in 1941, her son in 1944. She didn't ask me who I had been, only whether I would chop wood in the morning. I did. But I didn't stay. The next night I met a man in the woods, a former officer from the Latvian Legion. He had a pistol, a compass, and no name. "They're calling us Forest Brothers," he said. "You coming?" I nodded, because the war wasn't over. Not for us, not for Latvia. I shed my last uniform in the pine woods of Kurzeme sometime in June. We didn't wear insignia anymore, just heavy coats, boots laced with wire, and old rifles carried across our backs like shadows we couldn't let go. There were 7 of us at first. No names, no ranks, just men. We slept in a dugout we built ourselves, camouflaged beneath fallen pine branches. It was barely large enough to stand and stank of wet earth and tobacco. But it was home, safer than any village now under Soviet watch. We called ourselves Forest Brothers, Meja Brali. Some were former legionnaires like me. Others were farmers, students, or railway men who had fled NKVD arrests. Our leader was an older man, Janis, who had fought in the Latvian War of Independence back in 1919. He had a scar across his chin and a quiet way of looking at you, like he was measuring whether you'd survive winter. I think we all knew. None of us truly would. We struck where we could: rail lines, Soviet convoys, party offices in small towns, always at night, always fast. We used Molotovs, stolen grenades, even old rifles from the First War. Every action was meant to remind them we hadn't disappeared, but the Soviets responded with fire. By July, they had mobilized the NKVD's 5th Division specifically for counterinsurgency in the Baltic. They brought dogs, informants, mass arrests. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were hunted men. One night we raided a Soviet supply truck near Tulsi. It was supposed to be simple: drop trees on the road, disable the driver, take the goods. But the truck was bait, an ambush. We lost 2 brothers, Roberts and Wilhelms. One bled out before we could move him. The other was shot in the stomach and captured. We heard rumors later that they paraded him through the village before executing him. After that, Janis stopped saying our names out loud. In August, we made contact with another group near Madona. They had built a more permanent camp in an abandoned logging outpost. There I met Ilza. She was 20 perhaps, red hair, eyes like storm clouds, and a voice that could command silence without ever shouting. She carried a pistol at her hip and treated her wounds with birch bark and vodka. She had lost her father to the Soviets in 1941. Her brother, conscripted in 44, never returned. But she laughed sometimes, real laughter. One night under the stars, she told me, "We're all ghosts, but even ghosts can choose how they haunt." I never forgot that. We were supported by civilians, quietly, risked everything for us. A woman in Aisput fed us bread soaked in bacon grease and said nothing when we slept in her root cellar. A farmer in Dobele left maps and extra cartridges under his barn boards. But the Soviets watched everything. The MGB, what replaced the NKVD, was everywhere. In September, they burned an entire farmstead in retaliation for harboring partisans. Inside were a mother, her husband, and their 2 children. We weren't there, but we carried that with us like frost in the lungs. By autumn, the leaves began to fall, and so did our numbers. We no longer gathered in groups larger than 4. Fires were forbidden. Smoke meant death. Some of us took to sleeping in trees, less chance of dogs catching your scent. Food grew scarce. We dug for roots, trapped rabbits, ate bark soup. Once we stole a pig from a kolkhoz and cooked it over coals with garlic stolen from a field. It was the best meal I've ever had. We toasted with rainwater and laughed like fools. We needed to remember we were still human. In October, I returned alone to the ruins of my village near Cesis. My mother was gone. Neighbors said the MGB came for her months earlier. She had refused to say where I was. They took her anyway. The house had collapsed. Her sewing machine still stood in the ruins, rusted and silent. I stood in the rubble, holding what remained of her shawl. It smelled of dust. I didn't cry. I just walked back into the forest and didn't speak for 3 days. By November, the snow came early. We built a new dugout farther north near Valmiera, deeper into the forest. Fewer roads, fewer villagers, fewer chances of betrayal. Ilza and I shared stories under blankets stitched from old uniforms. She told me she had once dreamed of becoming a painter. "I still draw," she said, showing me a sketch of our camp, trees rising like spires behind it. "You think there's a Latvia to return to?" I asked. She shrugged. "There has to be, or why fight at all?" The Soviets began posting leaflets in towns. Surrender and live. Keep hiding and die. Some surrendered. Some disappeared. We stayed. We chose exile under pine boughs, silence over prison bars. Because even if Latvia was buried beneath another empire, we refused to let it rot in our hearts. The forest is a cathedral of silence in winter. Even the birds hold their breath. By January 1946, our world had shrunk to a few square kilometers of birch, pine, and snowdrifts. We no longer spoke of battles or liberation. We spoke in whispers about food, frostbite, and the names of those we hadn't seen in weeks. There were 4 of us left in our camp near Valmiera: Janice, Ilse, a new man named Andres who deserted the Red Army, and myself. Andres had been caught conscripting Latvians in eastern provinces and escaped before his own men turned him in. He had the haunted look of someone who knew both sides were liars. He slept with a pistol under his chin and never quite looked you in the eye. That winter was the cruelest of them all. Our dugout flooded with ice every night. Ilse's fingers turned black at the tips. I cut my leg falling through a frozen river and had to cauterize the wound with a heated bayonet blade. But what truly gnawed at us was time. The war was over. Everyone said it. Germany was gone. The Allies were negotiating peace. Even the Americans, we heard, were pulling back, letting Stalin have his way in the Baltics. Latvia wasn't even a line on a map anymore, just a Soviet province now. But we were still here, still hiding, still breathing. In February, Janice died in his sleep. No blood, no wound, just curled in his blanket like a man who had finally had enough of waiting. We didn't bury him, too dangerous to dig. We wrapped his body in birch bark and lowered it into a hollow tree. Ilse carved a tiny cross into the bark. That was all we could risk. As spring neared, we made the choice to split up. We'd survived 2 years as forest brothers, but the ring was tightening. Soviet informants were everywhere. The MGB had increased its bounties, 10,000 rubles for any tip that led to a partisan's arrest. Trust became its own prison. We buried our radios, burned our old maps. Each of us took a separate direction. Ilse kissed me once before we left. Her lips were cracked from cold. She said, "If you're caught, lie. Say you were never here. Don't die for a country that doesn't know your name." "I will die for you," I told her. "Then don't." And she vanished into the trees. For months I drifted from one hidden barn to the next, always moving, never staying. Once I hid under floorboards while Soviet officers drank tea above me, laughing about quotas and deportations. I remember one saying, "Latvians make poor communists but good fertilizer." I dug my fingers into the dirt to keep from screaming. In May, I returned to Sasis again. It had changed. Street names had changed. Buildings had Soviet flags and portraits of Stalin where the Latvian coat of arms once stood. I wore a fake name and worked for a week in a timber warehouse under forged papers. Nobody recognized me. Nobody looked anyone in the eyes anymore. Then I saw Ilse's face on a poster near the train station. A wanted notice. Her sketch was rough but unmistakable. It said, "Saboteur, enemy of the state, dangerous, report immediately." She had made it this far, and she had not been forgotten. That night I boarded a freight train west toward Kuldiga. I had heard rumors of partisans still hiding there, ones who'd found a way to escape across the border to Sweden. A fisherman named Berzinch, they said, ran boats under the moonlight. It was a dream, probably false, but dreams were the last currency I had. As the train rattled through the dark, I pressed my forehead to the window. The fields rolled by, dotted with half-buried fences and the occasional church steeple. Somewhere out there under the trees, others like me still waited. We were the war's leftovers, forgotten by Europe, feared by our countrymen, hunted by the new masters of our soil. But we still whispered Latvia's name into the night, because we remembered, because someone had to. The deeper into the countryside I wandered, the more time felt unstuck, as if the war still dragged on out here, while the rest of the world turned its back and moved forward. I reached the outskirts of Alsunga in early June 1946, thin as a scarecrow and still wearing my peasant disguise, patched trousers, wool coat, cap low over my face. I hadn't fired a rifle in months. The partisans were no longer fighting, not like before. We were survivors now, scavengers in a land too tired to rebel. Every village I passed bore the same marks, fresh Soviet banners, renamed streets, and eyes that darted away when they caught mine. People learned quickly what silence could save. Betrayal now was bought cheap, a sack of flour, a promise, a reduced sentence for a cousin in a Siberian camp. But I had one reason left to keep moving: Ilse. I still dreamed of her sometimes, her laugh echoing under the trees, the warmth of her gloved hand on my wrist, the last look she gave me before disappearing into the woods near Valmiera. I didn't know if she lived. I only knew that I hadn't seen her face among the corpses left by the MGB in the ditches. That was enough. In July, I found a man who knew the old network. His name was Michaelis, a crippled carpenter who once repaired saboteur radios for the partisans. He'd lost his leg to a mine outside Praley, but still moved with the twitchy paranoia of those who'd lived too long under occupation. He welcomed me into his home, which smelled of cedar and varnish, and offered black bread and kvass. Then he slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. It read, Ilse, last seen near Roja, medical alias Marta Berzina, working covertly with Refugee Channel. Roja, the coast. I could taste salt just reading it. She's trying to get people out, Michaelis said, but the Soviets are closing the channel. Boats only leave once or twice a month. It's suicide. I folded the paper and placed it inside my coat. Then I suppose I'll try suicide. I made my way north slowly, avoided checkpoints, slept in barns, changed names twice. Along the way, I saw what they'd done to us. The forests were quieter now. Fewer partisans, fewer camps. Most had died or been captured. Some had simply stopped fighting and returned to their villages, pretending they were never soldiers, never nationalists, never anything. They called them legalized, men who traded their conscience for survival. And I didn't blame them, but I couldn't join them, not yet. I reached Roja in early August, staying with an old fisherman whose son had died in the 15th Latvian SS Division, same as me. He didn't ask my name, just gave me a blanket and pointed toward the dunes. She's the one with the red scarf, he said, and there she was, Ilse, older, thinner, a scar now cutting across her brow, but alive, standing on a bluff above the sea, eyes scanning the horizon. I didn't say her name, just stood beside her. She didn't look at me, just whispered, I told you not to die. We embraced like two people who didn't know what was real anymore. Then we planned. She was working with a group smuggling people to Sweden, intellectuals, old officers, Jews, anti-communist refugees. They used fishing boats and silent nights. Bribes were paid. Sometimes the Soviets turned a blind eye, sometimes they didn't. We were to leave on the night of August 21st. Our boat was a rotten trawler captained by a man who used to smuggle bootleg cigarettes before the war. We had 15 passengers, including 2 children and a grandmother with only 1 shoe. We waited on the shore, hearts hammering. The moon hid behind clouds. Then we heard the engines. Soviet patrol. Not on the sea, behind us. Footsteps, barked orders, lights cutting through reeds. Someone screamed, someone fired. I don't remember who was hit first. Ilse grabbed my arm and pulled me into the water. We swam like beasts, bullets stitching the waves behind us. The boat never left shore. It burned. A flare ignited the gas barrels. We crawled ashore farther down, coughing, freezing, bleeding. Ilse's side was torn open. I held her against the sand. "I won't let them take you," I said. She just smiled, bloody teeth showing, and said, "Don't forget me this time." Then she passed out. She lived, barely. I carried her to an old cottage south of Talsi, where a former nurse stitched her up and hid us in her attic. We stayed there for weeks, unable to move, listening to Soviet broadcasts, watching the smoke rise from burned fields. Our war was over, but we were still running. That autumn, I burned the last photo of myself in uniform. I watched the edges curl and turn black, then crumble into the hearth like all the symbols and slogans we'd once believed in. I wasn't a soldier anymore, just a Latvian man with too many graves in his head and too much memory in his bones. And Ilse, still beside me, still breathing. By the time the snow came again, we had learned how to disappear. We changed names often, grew our hair longer, stopped asking too many questions. Our entire resistance now lived in whispers, no longer fighting battles with guns, but with silence, false documents, forged identities, and stolen seconds of freedom. Ilse and I stayed in the cottage outside Talsi for the rest of the winter. The nurse who sheltered us, Maja, was a widow. Her husband had been taken in '41 for suspicious behavior. She never knew where he was sent, only that he didn't return. She kept a faded wedding photo on the mantel and talked to it while she cooked. We did what we could to help, chopped wood, trapped rabbits. I even repaired a broken fence using wire pulled from an old Soviet radio. It made her smile for the first time, but I knew we couldn't stay. Every week brought more arrests. The MGB had increased their efforts to stamp out what they called bandit remnants. Some were caught just for keeping old Latvian flags or singing the wrong folk songs. Informants were paid in extra bread or better ration coupons. It didn't take much. In February 1947, we decided to leave, not for Sweden, for the underground. A man named Peterus had built a network beneath Riga. Safe houses, message couriers, and what he called quiet war operations. No more direct assaults. No grand sabotage. Just resistance through disruption. Spreading banned literature. Exposing Soviet collaborators. Protecting targets marked for deportation. He welcomed us with the caution of someone who'd seen too many friends betray him. But once he believed our story, he offered us places. Ilse became a courier. She could blend in, speak Russian when needed, and was fearless on a bicycle. I became a forger, copying travel permits, ration slips, and even internal MGB memos using a rubber stamp kit and a battered typewriter. It felt small compared to the trenches and firefights of Kurland. But it mattered. It mattered more than anything we had done with rifles. In March, we saved a school teacher named Antons, a man accused of writing a poem that honored Latvian independence. He was on a list for deportation to Siberia. Ilse biked through a blizzard to reach him, passed him a forged medical exemption, and led him to a railway worker who smuggled him east under cold tarps. We later heard he made it to Vilnius. That was a good day. There weren't many of those. The worst were the nights when we heard knocks on the door and had to hold our breath. The MGB searched entire buildings, random sweeps, they said, looking for rats. One night they came within 2 floors of our flat. Ilse held my hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. I'd hidden the documents under the floorboards. We were prepared to drink the cyanide pills if they breached the door. They didn't. But the old woman upstairs vanished the next day. So did the boy who swept floors at the corner bakery. So did our shadows. By April, we knew the underground wouldn't last forever. The Soviets were adapting, listening, learning. We had to scatter. Peterus gave us a final task: deliver a ledger listing all known MGB informants in western Latvia to a contact in Liepāja. If it fell into the wrong hands, every name in it would be dead within days. If it succeeded, we could stop a wave of arrests. Ilse and I argued over who should go. I told her I would, that she'd done enough. She told me, "You're too well known now. They've sketched you more than once. I'll go." We agreed to go together. We left on May 2nd, 1947. It was warm. The kind of spring day that makes you forget the last 8 years. We dressed as peasants, took back roads, slept in barns, avoided towns. Near Skrunda, a Soviet patrol stopped us. We had seconds to think. Ilse reached into her pocket, palmed a folded work permit, and smiled as she stepped forward. "We're going to my cousin's wedding," she said. "I've been promised fresh milk." The soldiers chuckled. One of them waved us through. Afterward, we sat under a tree and just stared at each other, shaking. "That was a good lie," I said. "It was the truth," she replied. "If we make it, I want to marry you." We made it to Liepāja. The contact was a former bookseller named Alexander's. He took the ledger, scanned the first few pages, and nodded. "You've saved dozens," he said. Then he offered us a place on a boat, an old Swedish trawler set to leave in 10 days. "It's risky," he said, "but it's freedom." Ilse looked at me and said, "Do we still believe in that word?" I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure. The sea has always been a promise. To Latvians, it whispered of trade, travel, migration, and escape. We were a coastal people long before we were a nation. And in 1947, the waves near Liepāja spoke only one word: freedom. Or so we hoped. The trawler was called the Milda, after the statue that once stood proud in Riga. Its wooden hull was blistered with salt and age. Its engine coughed more than it ran, but it floated, and that was enough. It had taken 3 successful trips before. It had also lost 3 passengers to Soviet fire on the 4th. Alexander's warned us of this with his hand pressed to a crumpled list of names. "I won't ask you to come," he said, but we already had. Ilse and I hid in an attic above a butcher's shop, less than a kilometer from the docks. The attic smelled of dried blood and salt. Through the cracked window, we could see the cranes of the Soviet harbor. We stayed there for 6 nights. 6 nights of waiting. 6 nights of praying not to be betrayed. I spent the time carving into my memory all that I was about to leave. Latvia's birch forests, the smell of burning peat, the songs my mother hummed before the war. I thought of my brother's hands when he fixed tractors. I thought of the cracked walnut table in our family home, long since taken. Ilse sketched. She drew the shoreline, the boat. My face, though I didn't know until much later. She kept her pencil moving as though drawing was the only thing keeping her sane. Once I asked her what she would do if we made it. "Forget," she said. Then, "Try." On the 7th night, we were told, "Tonight is the night." The Milda would leave under cloud cover sometime after 3 a.m. We walked to the dock in silence, avoiding the open streets. No lanterns, no shoes on cobblestones, just breath and hope. We boarded with 10 others, among them a Jewish doctor from Riga, a Lutheran pastor and his wife, and a boy no older than 15 who claimed he once worked in a Soviet canteen before they shot his father. Each of us carried a story we no longer wanted to tell. The boat pushed off under moonless sky. The engine sputtered to life, then steadied. We moved through the cold waves like ghosts. Ilse sat beside me, her hand tightly gripping mine. Neither of us spoke. I don't think we believed it was real. Then the flares lit the sky, red, white, then green, Soviet signal lights. A patrol boat, shouts. A searchlight arced across the water. The captain cursed, ordered silence. We veered hard south toward deeper water, hoping the patrol boat wasn't fueled for a long chase. They fired. Shells landed behind us, plumes of sea rising. One tore through our wake. Another clipped the stern. Panic broke. Screams, someone praying in Russian, someone vomiting. I braced Ilse against the railing and tried to shield her with my body. And then, just as fast as it began, silence. The patrol boat turned away, fuel low, perhaps. Or maybe they assumed we were already sinking. We didn't sink. At sunrise, we saw the faint outline of Gotland on the horizon. Sweden. Neutral. Free. Impossible. We cried then, all of us. Even the boy who'd said he never would. Ilse held my face and kissed me like it was the first kiss we'd ever shared. It tasted of salt and blood and everything we left behind. In Visby, we were given blankets, bread, and tea. The Red Cross gave us paper to write our names. Most of us didn't. We feared what would happen to those still in Latvia if our identities were known. But I wrote my name, Janis Kalninch. I wanted at least one truth to survive the war. Ilse became Marta again. The nurse's name, reborn. We stayed in a refugee camp on the outskirts of Stockholm for several weeks. It was quiet, too quiet. The sound of the wind through pine trees unnerved me. It sounded like Soviet trucks. They offered us a choice, emigrate or remain. We chose to remain, not forever, but long enough to recover, to breathe. We worked odd jobs. I fixed radios. Ilse painted for a local gallery, landscapes of a Latvia no one else seemed to understand. But I never stopped listening to the radio. And one day, in early 1948, I heard the words, "New wave of deportations in Latvia, thousands sent east." I dropped my wrench. Ilse found me that night sitting in the dark. "What now?" she asked. I looked at her. We survived. Others didn't. Then we tell it. We started writing. Not propaganda, not revenge, just memory. We wrote what we saw, what we did, what we regretted. Because in exile, memory is the only country you carry with you. I began with my brother. "Jacobs, I don't know where they buried you, or if they buried you at all. I hope they let you keep your boots. I remember how you hated cold feet." The words came slowly at first, scratched onto paper like a confession. I wrote them alone at night in the attic above our little flat in Uppsala, with the window cracked open and the pine trees brushing against the sky like shadows trying to forget their shape. Ilse did the same. She wrote to her mother, whom she'd last seen being shoved onto a cattle car in Riga in '41. Her letters were different, short, sharp, full of things unsaid. We never mailed them. We kept them in a tin box under the floorboards, a graveyard of ink for those we left behind. The years passed slowly. In the spring of 1949, I took a job as a typesetter at a Latvian language newspaper in Stockholm. It was a way to earn bread, but also to listen. Every story, every whisper from across the Baltic was another line to stitch to the wound we called home. I met others like me, dozens, former partisans, fugitives, farmers who'd crossed the sea in boats that barely floated, poets whose verses had become outlawed, a violinist who had once played for the president and now swept the steps of a train station. We gathered every 16th of March, the day of the Latvian Legion's remembrance, not to celebrate war, but to remember survival. We wore no uniforms, just coats, faces turned downward. We weren't soldiers anymore, but we were still witnesses, and that meant something. Ilse painted every day, not just landscapes now, but faces. Her mother, Janice, our old partisan leader, the children from the burned farm near Madona. She hung none of them. They lined the walls of our flat, each a reminder that memory could never be erased, only painted over. She said it helped her sleep. It didn't help me. In December 1949, we received word that Alexander's, the bookseller who had saved our lives with the ledger, had been captured and executed, shot in the back of the head after a show trial. They said he smiled when the sentence was read. I sat at our kitchen table for hours after that, writing his name over and over again, Alexandrs, so it wouldn't fade. Ilse asked me one snowy night, "Do you still believe we were right?" I looked at her hands, the way they trembled when she painted fine lines. "I think," I said, "we were just too late." She nodded, lit a candle, and we sat in the silence of a country that was not ours and a life we never asked for. But we were alive. That was something. In the spring of 1950, we published a small volume of our stories, Vestules Mujabai, Letters to Eternity. Just 30 copies, hand-bound, typed on an old Remington, no authors listed. We passed them in churches, in bakeries, in back rooms after choir rehearsals. The first page read, "To those who vanished, to those who resisted, to those who remembered, we were here, you mattered." We signed it with a drawing, Ilse's idea, a pine tree standing alone in a field of snow. Sometimes when I walk the streets of Uppsala, I still hear the Russian language in passing. I no longer flinch, but my ears listen harder. Sometimes I dream in Latvian. Sometimes I wake with frost on my breath and think I am back in the dugout, back in Valmiera, hearing wolves in the dark. But I am not. I am here, with Ilse, with words. I never thought I would live this long. We weren't made for years. We were made for moments, violent, sharp, lit by muzzle flashes and buried in ditches. In my mind, I never saw myself growing old. But time is a cruel miracle, and I've come to understand that memory is a form of survival too. It is 1951, and Latvia remains a shadow behind the Iron Curtain. They call it the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic. On the maps, it is red. On the radio, it does not speak its own name, but in the hearts of the scattered, the displaced, and the quiet, it still breathes. We live now in a small white house on the edge of Uppsala. Ilse keeps a garden. I repair clocks, though fewer people need them these days. They say time runs on electricity now, but I still like the tick, the weight of winding something by hand, the way it remembers what humans forget. Our flat is lined with paintings, books, clippings. The pine tree from the frontispiece of our little volume hangs in the hallway. Ilse made a full canvas version now. It watches over us like an old sentry. Many of our friends from those years are gone. Some, like Pateris, died in a Siberian gulag. Others made it to Canada, Brazil, or America, starting new lives with new names. A few came to Stockholm, and we meet sometimes in the back room of a cafe. We don't talk much about the past anymore, but we light candles and march. We sing the old songs, even if our voices crack. And when one of us passes, we say he remembered. That has become our measure. I kept writing. At first, only letters to the dead, then articles, then short stories. A publishing house finally offered to print a memoir, and I agreed, under a pseudonym. I didn't want my name to be the point. I wanted the truth to be. Ilse illustrated the cover, a snow-covered path vanishing into pine trees. The title was hers too, Живот Klusuma, to live in silence. It found readers, some from Latvia, some from elsewhere. The Soviets called it Western propaganda. I called it my apology. In 1954, I received a letter from a young Latvian man who had managed to flee through Poland. He had read my stories. He had questions. He asked if fighting had been worth it, if what we'd done meant anything. I sat for hours, pen in hand, uncertain how to answer. Finally, I wrote, "We didn't fight because we thought we would win. We fought because losing with dignity was better than living on our knees. We fought so that someone someday could stand again." I never knew if the letter reached him, but it reached me. Ilse and I never returned to Latvia, not even when borders softened, not even after Stalin died in 1953. We said we wouldn't go back as ghosts. We would return only when we could walk freely, not in disguise, not in shame. We never got that chance. Ilse passed in the winter of 1970, quietly, in her sleep. Her last painting was of a birch grove in early spring. I buried her in Uppsala's old cemetery beneath a stone that bears only her name, her years, and a line she once wrote in her journal. I carried my homeland inside me, so I was never without it. I visit every year on March 16th. I'm an old man now. I've outlived regimes and nations. I've seen flags rise and fall, borders redrawn, names changed. But one thing has not changed. I remember. I remember a Latvia that sang, that mourned, that fought. And when I go, soon, I think, I hope someone reads these pages and sees not a soldier or a partisan, but a man. A boy who watched his world taken and still dared to say no. A boy who became something harder than a fighter, a witness. My name is Edvans Kalninš. I was a son of Latvia. And though they tried to silence us, we spoke. Though they tried to erase us, we wrote. Though they tried to bury us, we lived. We were the ones who remembered. And now perhaps you will too.